Well, it's time for another video in my fresh video studio setup. And in this tutorial, I'm going to explain the process of using a polyurethane skin to provide a skin over a low density flexible foam. Now in previous tutorials, I've done silicone skins backed up by low density foam and then bonding the two together using cotton fiber. And I've also got some tutorials where we just use self-skinning foam by itself for the prop wrench and things like that, where you're relying on the skin properties of the foam, and especially some of the denser flexible foams like the TC284 work really well for that. But one of the problems you have when you use just a flexible foam poured into a silicone mold is the way foam expands changes radically with each part that you're making. So for this human head, for instance, we have something like this where we have the foam, when it's poured into the mold, as it starts to expand, we can wind up, if the mold is tilted ever so slightly one way or the other, we could wind up with a void in the nose or in the chin or in this lip. And you can wind up with a lot of inconsistencies on the surface of your skin, even with a really good self-skinning foam. So the best way to ensure that you get a really good skin all over your part is to make one with a polyurethane material. So in this video, I'm going to slosh cast a skin of the FP-40. FP-40 is kind of the urethane elastomer version of a casting resin. It's a fast-setting, low viscosity polyurethane system that's for product development, prototyping, anytime you need to make fast, flexible parts. And the FP-40, it cures to a kind of a medium softness, Shore A40, so it works well for this. And if we need that to be softer, you could always add the SC22 to this to knock it down a little bit. But we're going to slosh that around first, and that way we ensure that we get all the details, especially the ears, we get those cast really well, and then once that sets, then we're going to backfill that with our flexible foam. So that gives us the benefit of a high density foam by getting us that nice integral skin, but we don't have the drawbacks of accidentally getting a little void when the foam starts to expand and might miss a spot. And then also, just cost-wise, we wind up with that nice soft squishy foam underneath and then that tough outer skin, so it's just a lot more economical use of material. There's a lot of different uses for this kind of technique, everything from medical simulators to prop making. And one of the more interesting applications, I've had a lot of customers use this over the years, of needing to make a reusable master for making latex masks. And the way that sort of thing works is once you've made a master like this out of polyurethane rubber and flexible foam, you can make a seamless plaster or ultracal mold over this form and then squish it to pull it out of the bottom of the mold. And that allows you to have a seamless mold and a reusable master in most cases. There are times when it might be too complicated and you might have to tear it up and pull it out of the neck, but in a lot of cases, you could reuse that master, and then that gives you a very nice seamless mold that works really well for production. But without further ado, we're going to jump right in and get to it. So let's get started.
Now for this cast, I'll be using a platinum silicone mold I made in a two-part previous tutorial. This is a silicone mold made with TC5130F and TC5110F platinum silicone. And I'll link to this two-part tutorial series at the end screen, so be sure to check that out. That'll be both parts 1 and 2, both the silicone mold as well as the plaster bandage mother mold. Now we'll be casting this in stages, first the polyurethane skin and then the foam. Now you'll notice I'm shaking up the part B there of this kit of FP-40. Real important, anytime a manufacturer says shake or stir, you want to make sure you do just that. Anytime a product sits for a little bit between castings, some of those components can settle out. So if it says shake or stir, you want to make sure you do that. Now I'm measuring out my part B first. And this product, FP-40, is measured out 2B to 1A by weight. Now, an important shop tip coming up here, once you've dispensed your parts B and then your part A, and you don't necessarily have to dispense that in that order, but I always like to do the B first just in case I want to pre-pigment that. But with your part A, since that's typically the ISO in these systems, it's a good idea to wipe down the threads with a paper towel before you put the cap back on, and that prevents that crystallized part A from gluing that cap in place. Now I'm going to add a few grams of the 6800 series medium flesh tone pigment for polyurethane and start my smartphone timer. Now the working time of FP-40 rubber is about 4 to 5 minutes with a demold time of right around an hour to an hour and a half. Now I'm setting the phone for longer than that. I'm setting this for about a little over 6 minutes. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that that batch has completely gelled before I stop rotating the mold. So giving myself a little bit longer on that just ensures that I don't have the material dripping or running while I'm still trying to rotate it. Now, I do not own a rotational casting machine, so for this you're going to see how I do it with no machine, which is of course all by hand, and that's one of the reasons for the lightweight mold with the plaster bandage mother mold. Now the first thing I'm going to do is as soon as I get that material mixed up, I'm going to pour it into the mold so it runs down the sides of the mold, and that way I coat the sides of the mold and I get a little bit of extra action out of just the act of pouring it into the mold. And then I start sloshing that around, making sure that I fill the ears, because those ears are a little tricky. That's the area where we have a lot of undercuts and the areas, really thin areas, to make sure that our casting material flows into those accurately. So I want to tilt that so each ear is down and I see the little bubbles come up to the surface, and I can make sure those are completely full. Now obviously this is a lot easier to do with a closed mold on a rotational casting machine, but I mainly put this out there for those of you who don't have the luxury of a rotational casting machine and find yourself doing it by hand like yours truly. Now again, our working time is about 4 to 5 minutes at room temperature, so about 70 to 75 degrees, and our demold time is about an hour to an hour and a half, again at room temperature. So with polyurethanes, the warmer it is, the faster it's going to cure. So if you're doing this in the summertime in an area that's warmer than 75 degrees, your material will cure faster. And also if your material is stored at warmer than room temperature, it's going to speed that up as well. And one thing I like to do a lot with molds like this is warm them up, because it accomplishes a couple of things. It helps the material flow into the mold a little better, and it also speeds up that set time. Now, I won't make you sit through the entire 4 minutes of me sloshing this around, but what I typically do, my main way is right there, how I've got the head against my chest and I'm rotating it one direction, and then occasionally I flip it upside down to see if I get any little drips coming out, and just keep doing that. And that again, that's why I've got my smartphone there so I can check the time and just keep that going. And that way, by keeping it moving like that, I get a nice even skin all over the inside of the mold. And then when I flip it upside down and I don't have anything dripping out, that's when I know that it's set up enough to set it aside and get my foam ready for casting. Now the foam I'll be casting is TC266 variable density flexible foam, and you always want to shake up that part B before you dispense it. And real important on this, 266 expands pretty quick and it starts reacting pretty fast, so I'm going to go ahead and pigment the part B first. And the batch I'm mixing up here, I'm dispensing about 300 grams of part B to mix with 150 grams of part A. And now I'm ready to add my flesh tone pigment. And I'm going to be doing this foam casting about 15 to 20 minutes after the skin gelled. And that's important because I want to do this fairly soon after I slosh cast that FP-40 so I get a good bond between the FP-40 skin and that TC266 flexible foam. Now, by pre-mixing the pigment with the part B, that ensures that I get the most working time out of my foam, because if I try to color it after I add the part A, I'm going to be moving like a crack-addled spider monkey. So real important, get your B pigmented the way you want it, and then add the part A. Now, you'll also notice that I'm using a wooden stir stick here. And I know in some previous videos I've talked about using a stainless steel spatula. I don't typically use a steel spatula for foam because foam is much harder to clean off. So typically I use a disposable stir stick and just throw that away when I'm done with it. But foam is very adhesive, so do not underestimate the adhesive potential of flexible and rigid foams. Now again, this batch size is about 300 grams of part B mixed with 150 grams of part A. And you notice I got that mixed up and immediately dumped that into the head mold. And now I'm going to move the head mold to a slight angle to make sure that it fills up the nose and the chin. You notice I sloshed that a little bit there to make sure I get it in the ears, and then I'm going to set it back down on that bucket at a slight angle so I make sure it rises in a way that will fill up the entire mold. Now, quick word about foam and outgassing of foam. You want to make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area, but this is a water-blown foam system, so it's not releasing nasty, lethal gases or anything like that. You do want to make sure you're working in a well-ventilated, as you would with any polyurethane material, but this is a water-blown system, so very different than the old-school flexible foams. Now, 266 can be mixed to a couple of different densities. I use the 3-pound density for this piece. So this is the 2B to 1A ratio, which gives us a 3-pound open cell foam that's really soft and flexible. This is real popular for filling latex masks and creating bodysuits and puppets and things like that. And now this is about an hour later, and I'm ready to demold my part. And I really didn't even have to wait an hour for the flexible foam, more for the urethane skin on the surface. So as soon as that skin has set up completely, we have a nice finished part with a skin that's bonded to our foam core. Now I mixed up a little bit more foam than I needed. Next time I could probably back off that batch and do 200 grams of part B and 100 grams of part A, but flexible foam is easy to trim. The 266 can be trimmed with scissors or a sharp work knife. And now my part is ready for painting. And if I want to paint this, I could use some SC89 paint base. Or if we're doing this as a master for hydrocal or ultracal molds, it's ready to go. Now the advantage to using this combination of materials, the FP-40 with the 266 foam, is the fast production time. This allows us to produce a lot of parts in a short amount of time. Now, as usual, I'll post links to all of the materials I used in the video description, so be sure to check those out. And on the end screen here, I have links to several of the previous tutorials that might also be of interest to you. The 2-part series on the head mold, as well as an additional video on how to soften FP-40 with SC22. And if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe, and of course, click the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new content. And of course, thanks for watching.